Hello, everybody. My name is Chris Whited. Today, we're going to be doing a JavaScript marathon training session to talk about React and GraphQL. To start, here I am. This is me. My name is Chris Whited. I'm a senior software engineer at this.labs, where if you need to contact me, hit me up at my Twitter handle at cmwhited. That's CMWHITED. Feel free to ask me any questions, etc. You can also ask questions in the thread. But if you want to hit me up afterwards, that's cool too. Follow me if you have any feedback or questions or concerns. So today we couldn't do any of this without our sponsors, this entire JavaScript marathon training series. Our primary sponsor is this.labs. We are the partners in modern digital transformation. So we specialize in mentorship, consulting, training, staff augmentation for organizations. Find out more today at this.labs.com. You can go in there and you can have discussions, or you can find out more about what we do, see a little bit more about the team. You can send us an email at hi@this.co to also ask more questions. We do a variety of different things, language agnostic, front-end, back-end, architecture, etc. We also put on corporate trainings. So if you find yourself constantly trying to keep up with the evolving series of technologies with different frameworks, as we all know, JavaScript loves to create new frameworks, then come hit us up. We are the experts in these fields and all these different technologies, and we can help bring your team up to speed with the latest technology, with the latest architecture patterns and guidance. We can do things such as showing you how to migrate from an older style like AngularJS to Angular or React, etc. These kind of things. We also offer personalized trainings in different frameworks and technologies. On that note, we have some upcoming events. Every second Thursday of the month, we have a global React meetup where we bring in different guest speakers and different people to talk about the state of React and the state and how things are going or how they're using it in unique and cool ways. So if you're interested, go to our live link at reactjsmeetup.com. That's reactjsmeetup.com. Again, second Thursday of the month, and we have a React meetup. So a couple of other sponsors here is FaunaDB. This is a database built for serverless featuring native GraphQL support. So this is a full-featured global database that provides data to your app in minutes, access effortlessly from the browser and from mobile. Never again worry about your data correctness, capacity, redundancy, latency, availability, all those abilities, all those ilities that you're looking for. Today, they're offering a generous free tier, so you can try out FaunaDB. So we have some parameters, and we can push those out as you can see on the screen. But yeah, check out Fauna. It's pretty cool, especially in the serverless space. We also have Infragistics. So learn how to build better, faster Angular apps and with Ignite UI. There are hundreds of ready-to-use templates, Angular native components, and charts and controls to make your development experience positive. Ignite UI is the developer's choice for Angular. Check out our sample apps and try Ignite UI for Angular for free with the link on the screen. Also, we have a giveaway. So for joining the session, if you tweet at this.media and Infragistics with the JavaScript Marathon hashtag, you can get a chance to win a 1-year license to Ignite UI for Angular. So if that's something you're interested in, get on the Twitters, tweet at this.media, tag Infragistics, and tag the hashtag JavaScript Marathon, and you get a chance to win a 1-year license. Okay, so today's course, we're going to be focused on utilizing the Apollo GraphQL library to interact with the GraphQL API to query and mutate data. We will start with a quick intro into what is GraphQL, where is it, what is the concept, how do we use it, how do we query it, these kind of things, and the advantages it provides for us over a traditional REST framework. Then I'll show you our GraphQL API that I built, so that way you can understand it. And I'll go through the schema and talk about the queries and the mutations, and we'll do a couple examples through the API directly. Then we will talk very quickly about the Apollo GraphQL React hooks library to discuss what Apollo is, what the Apollo framework is, the different libraries that they provide, as well as how we're going to use their hooks API library to help create a very strongly typed API, to create a very strongly typed component system with React that reads data, mutates data from our API, and how we can use this to create resilient components that know about their types and know about the data that they're receiving, know what data they need to submit, those kind of things. So to start, what is GraphQL? So GraphQL is a query language for your API. It comes from Facebook. It started in around 2012 when they were redesigning their mobile apps. They were realizing that their current way, which was to like retrieve fully rendered HTML pages and render them onto a mobile app, was causing constant crashing. And so they came back to the drawing board, if you will, and they said, how can we make this better? How can we make this faster while also providing all the data that we need, but only the data that I need? So they came out with this concept that they ended up calling GraphQL. And the idea here is that I can, as a consumer of a GraphQL API, I can tell my API what data I want, what data I'd like to have returned, et cetera, right? So instead of it being like a traditional REST where I say, this is my endpoint, I need this, and it gives you what it's going to give you, GraphQL says, here's a query, and here's the return type of that query. Here are the parameters I need to pass to it now, and then tell me what you want back, right? So this allows us to build to define what our clients and our consumers want to return. This is very, very powerful. It helps with things with like size over the wire. It helps with things with performance, et cetera. And it gives us a typing system that allows us to define and describe our data and its structure. So it's no more questions of what does this look like? What is the shape of this contract? It's all defined, and therefore it's guaranteed, right? So down to things like, I know that I have this field that's going to be of this type, and it is required. So no more like, did I get it? Checking, null constraints, et cetera. If you get it back, if it's not there and you declare it as required, it fills at the GraphQL layer instead of you having to wait and then do the checks yourself. Some advantages of GraphQL over traditional REST are things like overfetching. So in traditional REST, if I'm looking at a list, right, and on that list, I really don't need the full data set. I just need something very simple, such as the ID, the name, a role, an email, et cetera. If I was looking at a list of users, right? Well, in traditional REST, that may be possible, but like in general, we would get just a list of that object, which could contain massive objects, right, which could contain roles and permissions, things that our list doesn't need, right? So now we're overfetching. We're getting in too much data that we don't need. That increases our size over the wire. It decreases our performance. It forces our client to do the parsing of it when that's not its goal, right? It should be able to just say, this is the data that I need. The other side of that is underfetching. So underfetching is the instance of like, I got this initial data set, yet I need more data. So I got this user, but now I need to go and get their comments. Now I need to go and get their tickets or whatever it might be, right? And so now I'm making multiple requests. And so what we know is that the API request response lifecycle is the most expensive part of our interactions. Anytime that I'm making a request to my API, I have to do a handshake layer where I make sure like, this is who I am. Do I have access to this? I have to be able to know that like, okay, this is the API, this is what I need. So that's an expensive life cycle. So underfetching is like, now I have to make multiple round trip requests from my client to my API and go through that life cycle multiple times in order to get the full data set. So GraphQL solves that by allowing us again to say, here's the full set of data that I need, and also batching those requests, which I'll get to. So that's another advantage. We have all or nothing, which is in GraphQL world, if you make a query or a mutation and an aspect of it fails, let's say again, I request a user, I also want that user's comments, and it fails to retrieve those users' comments, I can still see the rest of the data that was returned, and then I get an error object that shows me the fields that fail. So this way we can, at least from a UI perspective, we can introspect the data that we get back and say, oh, okay, well, I was able to get these fields, which is great, so I can display those to the UI, but there was an error getting this subsection of fields or this subsection of data. And so now I'm gonna, also display like, hey, we failed to do this, would you like to retry, et cetera, right? So it increases your UI UX to say, I know that this is the data I got back. It's very helpful, thank you. Now I also need this data and it failed. Okay, I'll go and handle that separately. We also have request batching. I kind of mentioned this earlier in underfetching, but the idea here is that we can send a batch of queries or a batch of mutations to our API and they will run. So queries, if you send a batch, are all asynchronous. It will run them in, as like a promise.all, if you will, or like asynchronously. And your response time is the time it takes to run the longest query. So if you have 3 queries, one of them takes a second and the other 2 are sub-second, your response will be the response of the longest query that's run. The nice thing on GraphQL is our power here is in the resolvers. This to me is like the crux. This is where when we define a query, we define a mutation, and we give it the types that we need, we can build resolvers around this to get that data. And that's very, very powerful because those resolvers are agnostic. That can be, a resolver can be a call to a data layer. It can be a call to another service. It can be an HTTP call. It can be a microservice call. It can be reading data from an S3 bucket from AWS, et cetera, right? So it doesn't care as long as it resolves to return the contract that we declared, then it solves these issues for us, right? So the power is taken into the hands of these resolvers to handle how it wants to retrieve that data. And lastly, so we utilize a schema definition language to define our schema types and queries. This is like it's our agreed upon contract between our UI and our API. We look at our API and we say, all right, this is the contract that we've all agreed on. This is our gospel. This is what we're going to look at. This is what I know when I make this request. This is what I'm getting back. And it allows us to build these complex types from these primitive types to come in and say, I know that I have a type of user and it's made up of these fields of these primitive types, and we can build those together to build these very complex types to get a data set that our UI can use and our clients can consume. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually, before getting to this slide, I'm going to show an example of our API and go through it a little bit and run a couple of things so we can see it, and then we'll move on to the React side. So our API today, very, very simple, is just something to like track tickets. Not exactly like a Jira clone, but Jira clone-esque, where we can track tickets and comments added to those tickets. I used Nest.js to expose this, which it has a GraphQL plugin module that's really cool. I highly recommend you check it out. And it allows us to expose a GraphQL API. So I chose that because it's pretty quick and easy to use. And on the back end, it's connecting to a Postgres database and it's running in Docker. Pretty straightforward. So in here, this is our schema. This is what I was talking about. This is our STL. This is where we define our types. We define our enums, our inputs, our queries, our mutations, et cetera, that make up what is our GraphQL API. And on the other side of this, on the Node.js, Nest.js side of this, it generates types, and then we create our resolvers and our service layer and our entities, et cetera. But very simple for this, we have an enum of response status. We have an enum of ticket status. This is a ticket that is created or updated has a status. This is the status of that ticket and provides further information. It was submitted, it's in ready, it's in progress, et cetera. We have a ticket type, so think like story or spikes or bugs or whatever ticket types you may have. We have a severity, so for bug types or whatever, is this a low severity? Like it's a nice to have. We can get to it when we can get to it, or it'll be deprioritized, whatever. A medium and a critical. We have a comment, which is a comment that we can add. Can I zoom in? Yeah, give me 1 second. I don't remember what it is on this. Ooh. Oh, that was not it. I'm going to bring it back up really quick. Sorry about that. Oh, there it is. Give me 1 second. Sorry about this. I'm going to try to zoom in the text here. Jeez. There we go. Hopefully that's a little bit better for y'all. Oh, it's Command Plus. Oh, man. Thanks, Matt. Jeez. Anyway, so we have a comment. This represents a comment that we can add to a ticket. So that way we can add comments. We can add, as you can imagine. So in GraphQL, when you have queries and you have mutations, and mutations, they expect input. So if you're going to pass something to be created, it expects it to be declared as an input. So when we see here is we have an input, comment, input. And so this is one of those things that when I see people, talking about GraphQL and they're like, this is something that confuses them because it can seem like duplication where we have a comment and we have a comment input in our case, and largely that structure is the same. I understand that and I can level with that. One of the things that I always tell them is this gives you opportunities to make things or change things or make things nullable as needed, right? So in the instance, like if we're reading a comment, we know it's been created. that means that we know that we have an ID. So we can say it's required. I have to have an ID. I have to pull in an ID. But if we're creating a comment, then I'm not going to have an ID. It's auto-generated. We use UUIDs, et cetera. In that case, I can tell it, like on my input, I can declare my ID in case I want to use it for an update. Otherwise, I don't have to, right? So it can be undefined. So that way, when I want to create a comment, I don't have to pass it in, and it does get generated. So to me, like that, I'm not saying it's not a valid argument, but it's something of, if you define your structures with a comment and with an input and a type, it does give you some advantages of what you can declare as required, not required, or pass in different fields to add in other things, etc. So anyway, so my comment input here looks very similar to my comment, but I make my ID non-required, and I don't have the created at and updated at timestamps, as they're not going to exist at that level. The other thing is, so now we have a ticket. Sorry, not the other thing. So a ticket, this represents like just a chunk of work, an entity of work that a dev could pick up and do, right? So it's going to have fields about it that we might imagine: ID, a title, a description, and some acceptance criteria, story points, a reporter, assignee, a status, ticket, etc. And then this is an important part: a list of comments associated to that ticket. So as we add comments, they get associated to a ticket via a foreign key. Now, if we request the comments, we can bring that up. And now, again, we have an input type, so that way we can mutate our ticket, whether that's create or update. So now we get to define our queries. So in GraphQL, again, everything is based off this type concept where we can bring together complex types to create a type. So in here, query, as you can notice, is just a type, right? There's nothing particularly special about it other than we know it by convention. It is a top level of our query, so we amass queries in it. But this is just made up of types, right? So in here, when I say get tickets, and I'm going to return an array of tickets, which is what this designation is, right? So when I surround it in square brackets, that's me designating that it's an array, et cetera. Okay. So these are our queries. So we can get tickets, get a single ticket, get a single comment, save a ticket, update the ticket status, save a comment, delete a comment, and then I group them all together and just scalars, a custom property. In this case, it's a date or timestamp. So I have this running. So let me bring that up. In this case, I'm using the Nest.js GraphQL library or plugin, which uses Apollo under the hood. And that allows me to use this concept called Playground, which is like Postman, but built into a browser. It allows you to run queries as well as view your schema, etc. So we can see in here, this is my schema. This is what I have generated. I can try to zoom this in as well. So in here, this is just what I showed you before. And we can use these docs. These docs are very helpful because then I can look at it and click on something and say, oh, I know that get tickets is an available query, and here is what I expect to be able to get back. So I'm going to run some of these examples. So this is me. I'm going to get some tickets, and so I'm going to run. I'm going to remove you, and I'm going to run my get tickets. And you can see on the right-hand side, it finished running. I get a data or a JSON object returned that has a property data. This is the convention. So under data, you can have multiple objects, this is where batching comes in. So I can run multiple queries, and then it will get me different, it'll show these different results, and it'll nest them under this data object. So then I could do, data dot, in this case, get tickets, and this would be a list of tickets. And then I have a list of comments with it. And I specify over here on the left, here's the fields that I want returned. And as I mentioned, if I don't want all these data, if I don't want all this data point, if I just want a subsection of it, like let's just say I want that, right? So I just want the ID, the title, etc. I can run that. Now I only get those back. Cool. So now I'm going to introduce the Apollo framework, and then we'll actually start writing React. So the Apollo framework, or Apollo, they are a framework, they're a company. They have a lot of different JavaScript SDKs that you can use with different frameworks, right? So they have like server-side frameworks to build APIs, which is what I said I was using. So I'm reusing that to do our Nest.js GraphQL plugin. They have serverless frameworks that are great, Koa, Express, etc. And on the front end, or the UI side, to consume that in a JavaScript SPA, we have the Apollo library, or Apollo React hooks library. There's an Angular library, Vue, and I think Svelte as well. But today our focus is on our Apollo React hooks library. This is really handy because this uses the power of Apollo to connect to our GraphQL API, and it uses the React hooks API. So in today's example, everything that we build will use the hooks API and use this Apollo React hooks library. Cool. Okay. So very straightforward. This is our app. I'll show you the running. It is very, very simple so far, which gives us opportunities to add stuff to it. What we have is just a React app with TypeScript using functional components and using Material UI as the design framework because I didn't want to spend too much time working on design. So very simple. I have an app. It creates my header, and then I expose a router using the reach router into my main, so that way all my routes get injected into this space here and through this import. Okay, so like I said, what we have so far is just a general setup. So what we're going to do is we're going to add our Apollo React hooks library. We're going to create our client, which is how we connect to it, which is how we tell our app that we're connecting to a GraphQL library using Apollo and the Apollo provider, and then it allows us to create a client that has our connection layer. So pretty straightforward. I'll just show you in here. Get started. Okay. So we're going to install some libraries here, Apollo Boost and Apollo React Hooks and GraphQL. So I'm going to do some yarn here. Apollo Boost is what exposes the client, by the way, and a GQL library, which is like a way to define our queries. Apollo/React-hooks. Right. Cool. So now we have our step one, which is we have our framework installed. So now what we're going to do is we need to create a client. So I'm going to import Apollo Boost, or the Apollo client, from our Apollo Boost library. I'm going to do that in my index, so that way it wraps the entire app in this Apollo framework. So that way it's available at each sub-child or child of this element. So let me create my client here. The new Apollo client. I'm going to actually import something from my, no, I'm not. I was going to import this from an environment variable, but I don't think it's necessary. So I'm going to say URI, and this is our URL. This is it's just the URL of our API. In my case, it's localhost 3000/GraphQL, which, if you remember, is also the same URL we have here. Super cool. Okay. And now I need to add my Apollo provider and then wrap my app with it. So let me get back to here. So I'm going to import my Apollo provider. And I'm going to wrap my component in it. But I'm going to wrap it at this level. I don't need to wrap it around the entire thing. Okay. Let's make sure that starts. Compiling. Make sure I'm not getting any massive errors. Okay, so it looks like we're good. So now what we're going to do is we're going to retrieve a list of tickets. I have one example in there, and we're going to display them on the screen. So I have in my app router, I have a default route that redirects any just empty route to tickets. And this is my tickets dashboard, which as of right now is just a super simple component. It doesn't really have anything to it. So what we're going to do is we're going to use our querying framework that is exposed by Apollo here, and we're going to write a query that returns our results of a list of tickets. But first, let's create our model. So because I'm using TypeScript, we're going to define our model that we expect back from our, excuse me, that we expect from our API. So I'm going to create a comment model with our nested type, and I'm going to cheat here a little bit. I'm just going to grab these from the generated types from our API. Which if we were using it like a mono repo, this would be really cool because we could generate those types to a shared lib and then import them from there. So then as our schema changed and as those types change, we automatically can consume those new types. So that's pretty cool. But I did not. Okay. So let me go grab you from here. I'm going to sure. I'm going to do this first. I'm going to just grab the comment. I want you in here, though. Okay. Now in here, in my ticket, I'm going to get rid of that because that was an accident. I have a ticket. Okay. I'm also going to bring my enums into here, which is why that's blowing up. Okay, so now we should be good. So we have tickets, and I need to import my comment. Okay, so now we have our ticket, and it has these different fields as we talked about that match our schema. Cool. So back to my dashboard, I'm going to go ahead and import my ticket model. I'm going to import my use query hook from Apollo. We'll go with some of those other options, but primarily for this, we'll just focus on use query and use mutation. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to simply just get a list of these, validate that I can, in fact, read from my database, and then I'll just expose it as a JSON string, and then we'll pretty it up a little. Okay. So this returns an object. It's like Apollo query result. So I'm going to say use query. Let me define my query first. Tickets list query. This is going to be a GQL string. I'm going to say I'll copy this from here. Okay. Now, use query also takes generics. So you can tell it what you expect the type that it's going to respond with. And because in GraphQL, we know, again, like I said over here, this is going to return a JSON object that has data. And then underneath it, it's got our query that we ran. So in this case, it's going to be tickets. If I use an alias here, I could say tickets : like that. Then if you notice now over here, I have tickets. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to say tickets. Spell it right. And I'm going to create just a simple type here that represents my response. So I'm going to say tickets list query response. And I know, again, the top level is data, but really what I'm looking for here is that we have tickets, and that is going to be of type ticket array. So I'm going to say tickets list query response. And we could also pass in variables, but this query doesn't have any variables. I'll go over that. I'll go over that with the details view. Sorry, to address your questions, I'm kind of going back and forth between watching the stream and addressing the questions. But I see a question from Halaachiful. Would additional tooling be necessary to share types between the server and front end? So I kind of mentioned this a little bit. Yes, in some ways. I mean, the way I would recommend, if that's what you'd really like to go with, is you could use like a monorepo. So NX by Narwhal is a pretty good monorepo design pattern. And in that, you can create an API that has this, that exposes the schema and the generated types. And then you can generate the types to a shared library and then import those into your UI. So yeah, that's a really cool pattern. So that would be a really cool way to do that. You could also generate them to a shared library in other ways, but that's what I would recommend would be the NX monorepo approach if that's what you'd like to go with. And again, that's really powerful. Okay, so now back to this. I'm going to give it my query. So I have a tickets list query. And so now I have basically something that will return this Apollo query result, which has a few fields here for me. So I get loading. This is just a Boolean of is my query loading. And error. So if there's an error connecting to it or whatever, that'll be my error object. And the data. And the data is an object that has nested ticket. So if I say, so now I'm going to do something simple here and just return a loading indicator if we're loading. Otherwise, I'm going to just stringify the data, and then we'll make it a little prettier. Loading, come on. So if we're loading, we're going to return a linear progress bar. That's going to be our primary color. Oh, don't need, that's why, okay. Color, not you, primary. Otherwise, like I said, this is going to be pretty gnarly to start, but it'll get better. And this is going to be our data dot tickets. Really? There we go. And that's optional, so I'm going to use some optional chaining here. But what is your issue? What? Oh, oops. I did the wrong import. There we go. Okay. We're running. We have to refresh this because yeah, okay. Expected name tickets. Oh, I know what the problem is. Okay, sorry. So I need to clear this as a query. That's my bad. So we have query, and then I'm going to wrap it like this. Technically, you don't need query. It's kind of the default, but I'm going to for this case. Hey, it's horribly ugly, but we have data on the screen. So now I'm going to make it pretty. Or not very, because time is of the essence. Import the, okay. Also going to add some styling into here. Something very, very simple. Just give me some space at the top. Okay. I'm going to grab my classes. And now I'm going to make this a little bit better. I'm going to put it in a container. All right, so a container basically, think Bootstrap, it just puts it inside of a container, so it just keeps the styling consistent. So now that I have a container, now I'm going to, like, if it's loading, I'm going to display the progress bar. Otherwise, I'm going to display a list of my tickets with just very simple data. Okay, so now we have a container. I'm going to apply a style to it. Hopefully this helps it move down a little bit because I have a fixed header, so that way it doesn't move if we scroll. So in here, I'm going to say if loading. Then I want to display my linear progress bar. Okay. If error, so if we have an error message here, then I'm going to display that. But again, because of time, I'm just going to make this kind of gnarly. I'm going to make it pretty ugly and just say, like, all right, error JSON.stringify and do error. Can I? Oh, there's a message. Well, I'm just going to display the message then. This is why TypeScript's handy. This gives me all that stuff for me. Okay, so if we're not loading and there isn't an error and we have data, now we're going to display a list. Okay. And so what we're going to do is we're going to map over all the tickets in the data. So we're going to say data.tickets.map. And this is going to render a list item with our ticket information on it. So I know in here I have a ticket. I'll type ticket. Cool. And I'm going to render a list item. I'm going to give it a key, otherwise React yells at me. I'm going to make up my ID. And I'm going to, I think that's all I need. So now I'm going to say list item text primary. And this is just going to be to start my ticket.title. Actually, I'm going to make it my ticket title with my type, with the status, I think. I'm going to say ticket title, and then I'm going to give it my status, ticket.status. And I'm going to close that so it doesn't yell at me anymore. I'm going to also give it a secondary, and I'm going to put in here the description, assuming that it has a description. So I'm going to say ticket.description, and fine. I'm going to put a type. Oh, actually, you know what? I'm not. I'm just going to do simple span ticket.description. Hello, Atchaful. Yes, I mentioned this a little bit earlier. It could return data and an error. So if part of the data was successfully returned, but part of it was not, like if there was an error retrieving like a nested object, you would have both. So in this case, I'm not going to handle that, but yes, that is a valid use case where we could have data and we could have an error. And the error would be like, I couldn't retrieve this field. Like in our case with a ticket has comments. Like we could say, I couldn't retrieve any comments because of whatever, but here's the rest of your ticket data. So yes, that is a valid use case. Okay, and now we have a ticket. And we have testing, although I think I need more space up top. Hold on. There we go. So we have a testing ticket. It is in progress, and we have a description. Look at that. It's data. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this ticket clickable. I'm going to make it, or this list item clickable, and I'm going to navigate us to our details page. So I'm going to make it a button. I think we can say component equals have. And then I can say retread. I'm just going to import the navigate functionality from my reach router. Okay. So what I'm going to say is I'm going to create a function in here that's going to navigate us to our ticket details. Okay, then I'm going to add a click event here. On click equals nav 2, and I'm just going to build the string. So to be donations slash my donation ID, or sorry, wrong thing. Tickets, ticket ID, and details. Now if I go back, I should get now it's hoverable. I get, that API where I get that kind of stuff. So now I'm going to create my ticket details page real quick. So I'm going to say details.tsx. And in order to make this routable, I need to add the route component props from reach router. So I'm going to bring those in with me. So I'm going to, what else do I want? Yeah, I'm going to bring in some styling stuff here. I'm going to bring in my, yep. I'm going to bring in quite a bit of this actually. Okay. Now I'm going to say I have a const of details. And so the way the reach router works in this instance is I can tell it like, this is the field that I want. When you find this ID from parameter from my URL, I'm going to plug it into this prop component. Sorry, component prop, the other way around. So in this case, I'm going to call it ticket ID. It's going to be a string. Then I'm going to say I have a ticket ID. I will create classes in a moment. And the first, what we're going to do in here is we're just going to load our ticket. So for default details. Okay, so just like I did in my dashboard, I'm going to define my query here. It's going to be a little more verbose. Like I'm going to bring in my comments. I guess the really only difference is I'll bring in my comments. So I have a ticket, and I'm going to change you to details. And because we know that if we look at our API, getting a singular ticket requires that we pass in an ID, and that's required, right? So I have to tell it that I have that parameter. So in here, I'm going to declare a variable of type of name ID of type string and make it required. And so now I need to use the get single ticket query, and I'm going to pass it the variable ID, and I'm going to add some other fields in here. Comments. And so in this case, comments is a nested type, so it has fields on it as well. So if I can't just say comments and then without telling it what of those fields I want from the comments. So in here, I'm going to say the ID. I want the ID. I want the message. I want the owner, so whoever wrote it, and sure, give me when it was created and when it was last updated. Excuse me. So now I'm gonna have to change my response because I'm getting a singular ticket back. So my tickets, it'll be ticket details query response. And I know that here I said ticket, that's my alias. So my nested object here will be ticket, and it's going to be a singular ticket instead of an array. And I'm also going to build my variables in here. So I'm going to say ticket details query variables. And again, this is just my ID, right? So I just have an ID that I'm going to pass in. And Apollo will do the rest of the work for me. So I'm going to I'm going to use my use query here. Use query. I'm going to pass it my response, what I expect from my data. So this is my ticket details response. I'm going to tell it my variable type. So my query variables. And I'm going to give it my query that I hope I renamed. I did. Ticket details. And now to pass in my variables here, though, I have this options object. And so I'm just going to say variables. And this is an object of whatever it is. So in this case, it's ID, right? As you can tell, we get some type safety here. It's what we expect from our variables. So we have ID. And this is our ticket ID from our prop, from our component. And so now I can say loading and data. Okay, and I'll bring an error. Okay. Yeah, so this is pretty cool because like the use query is pretty powerful here, and there's other options in here that are pretty helpful at times. Out of the box, the Apollo framework caches your results. So it caches them locally, like it's like local state management handled through Apollo. But sometimes that may not be what you want, right? Like that's oftentimes great, but sometimes you may want to be very specific. Like I always want to load this from the network. I always wanted to make a request from the network. That way, if like as things change, I get the most recent updates. Now, there are ways on the side of the mutations when I mutate a ticket that I can tell it, now I want you to rerun this query and get the results from the network. That's also really helpful too. So in here, just to show it, I'm going to say fetch policy, and I'm going to do network only. So this will always make an HTTP call to my server to get the results instead of pulling it from the cache. Okay. I'm going to bring in some other things to make it pretty. It's card header. That's right. And then just simple card content. Okay. And so just like I did on the previous, on the details, so I'm going to say, give me a container. And I can apply the container at the root level and handle it there, but I didn't, so I'm going to add it to here. I'm going to say, if we're loading, I'm going to display my loading indicator, my progress bar again. I forgot to import. Oh, not you. You. Oh, I didn't. Oh, well, look at me go. Ooh. But before I forget, though, I need to give me my route component props. That way we can route to it. Okay, so and linear progress. I didn't make that. Linear progress. Accelerate equals primary. Cool. And cool. Same thing with here. I'm just going to just, again, copy out the errors. Where are you? This is, okay. And now I'm going to say, if not loading, and not error, and data. I'm now going to render my ticket details into a card. Cool. Now I have a card header. I think the property here is title. It is. And this is just going to be my title, as you can imagine, from my card, or from my ticket. So data.ticket.title. Oh, you. Cool. Yeah, that'll be good. And now I'm going to add some content into here. I don't know. However you like to structure this, I'm just going to make it pretty simple and just, you know what? I'm going to add it like a list. Doesn't really matter, but it's one way to handle this thing. Okay. So I'm going to say list. This will make sense in here in a second. Okay. List item text. So my primary of this is just going to list out the, I'm not going to go through all of these, but this is going to be like just a like property to value. So it'd be data.ticket.title. And then my secondary will say title. Okay. And to show this, I will have description. And then to show that we get our comments back from this, I'm just going to make this pretty straightforward here. So list item subheader, or list subheader. And I'm going to say, look at what you have. Never mind. I'm just going to do it like this because I'm not. Okay. So now I'm going to iterate through my comments on my ticket. So I'm going to say data.ticket.comments.map. This gives me a comment of type comment. I think I need this one. I do. Okay. And again, I'm going to just create a list item in here that represents each of my tickets, or each of my comments on my ticket. We give it a key, which is going to be my ID. Oh. And I'm going to give it text, and this is just going to be the comment text. And I'll give it a secondary to make it the owner. Okay, so now we have some basic details. I'm going to add this to my, I'm going to give it some space on the top again because of my header. I don't actually need the theme. Okay. And I'm going to say class name. Nope. Yep. Okay. So now I'm going to go to my router here and I'm going to import my details. So this will be ticket details from /ticket/details. And I'm going to add it into here. So I'll say ticket details, and my path will be /tickets/ticket ID. The colon here designates it as a variable, like a parameter for the router, and details. Okay. Go back to our app. What's your issue? Oh my goodness. Okay, sure. You're not wrong, but that doesn't mean I am happy about it. Actually, I'm going to do it this way. Come on. Now I can get rid of that. Okay. Awesome. So I'm back here. I have my tickets, and I click on this, and I can go to the details. And now I have the ticket details with all my comments. So this returns everything that we have in this object here. So I have access to each of these things. So if I wanted to add more here, I could do something like ticket type, right? So type and status, etc., right? So then whatever data that I want to show, I can now display in here, and I can look at these comments, and I can add comments. I think we're about to run out of time. I think we have to end at 12:30 on the dot. Unfortunately, I didn't get to the create ticket part. What I can do is I can push some of this work up into my GitHub. So that way, anybody who wants, they can go and check it out, and we can tweet it out from the this.media account / my own account. So yeah, I think I want to open this up right now to just like ask some general questions. So if you have any questions or comments, you can post them in the chat here. There is about a 15-second delay, so I'll wait and give people time to ask some questions and comments. Otherwise, I don't have nothing else to like really start. It's kind of late. Sorry about that. I hope this was helpful though. But yeah, sure. Go ahead, and I'm opening up the floor for questions. I will say the waiting on this part is probably the most awkward, but these are the times. Yeah, so what I would have done with next is probably added in mutations. So our mutations would allow us to create a mutation. There's a use mutation hook as well that we can use where we pass in our mutation query, our mutation object, and give it the variables as well. So that way we could do something like create a ticket or update a ticket status, create a comment, etc. All right, I'm going to give about a couple more seconds for comments, and then I'll do the closing remarks slide, and then we'll call it a stream. Okay, so I see a couple questions coming in. Okay, let's start with Yunhao Zhang. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your names. That is my bad. So how does Postgres connect with GraphQL? Yeah, so no worries. So in this case, that connection exists at our API. So if we go back to our API here, our API is responsible for that connection. In my case, I'm using Nest.js. So I use the Nest.js type ORM plugin. Also, check out Nest.js, it's pretty dope. So in here we have it's really cool. So in here, I tell it like, okay, this is where I define my type and how I connect to my database. So I tell it that I'm connecting to a Postgres database. I give it a host, my database name, the port, the username and password, etc. And in my case, I'm actually running this through Docker. So I use a Docker compose file to create my database and the volumes for it. And then my API connects to that directly. So that's how I connect in my case. But again, like it's agnostic, right? You don't have to do Postgres. You could do whatever. You could do Dynamo or MySQL or SQL Server or whatever you would like. It's all determined by the API and the resolvers. Okay, next question. Where are the queries to the backend DB defined? So there's two ways to answer this. So in our API, which is what I have showing right now, this is my schema definition language, or my SDL. This is what defines my available queries and my available mutations. So in here, when I have this type query, that's me saying these are the available queries that you can use on my API. So when I said get tickets, right? So we have get tickets. I'm defining that here at line 137. That might be easier to see. So this is where I say, like, I have a query get tickets, and it's going to return an array of my ticket type. And then in my front end, or my UI, my app, I call it using this query tag. So I say I have a query that is going to be using get tickets. So this get tickets here maps to this get ticket exposed query. Okay. Next question by Wayne. Does GraphQL require any configuration on the server? Yeah, so you have to expose a GraphQL API. So in my case, I'm using the Nest.js GraphQL plugin that is it like connects with Apollo. In my case, Apollo Server Fastify, because it's my preferred option for Nest. But yeah, so I mean, Apollo, if you're in JavaScript, Apollo has a lot of different SDKs that you can use for this. They have one for Koa, Express, serverless Lambdas. If you're using Node.js serverless with AWS Lambda, they have one for Nest. But if you wanted to use Java has their own libraries for this. So does Kotlin. Go has a really cool one. Python has one called, I think, Graphene, but I might be wrong on that. But yeah, so you have to configure, just like you'd expose like your REST API. You have to tell your API that it's going to expose a GraphQL endpoint, and then you have to configure how that's done. In my case, what I'm doing in my app module, I use this GraphQL module here that creates my /GraphQL endpoint and exposes my GraphQL playground query get request and my post request, which accepts my queries and mutations. It also reads my .GraphQL SDL file and generates my types. All right, next question. How would you compare Nest.js to Prisma /Nexus? Do they fulfill the same role? I have not used Prisma too much. From what I understand about it, is it kind of sets up a lot of this stuff for you, and it like builds those connections and like introspects maybe your database to return a GraphQL API. So it would be a little more turnkey. It would do a little more out of the box for you. And so what I did, where I have to like create some of these types. But at the end result is you get a GraphQL API. So if like it depends on what you're looking to do. There's other libraries for this as well. Amplify and AppSync from AWS does this as well, and it'll even generate like Dynamo tables or REST database using RDBMS tables and databases for you. Trying to think. I know that there's other options. Oh, Hashira is another really good option, where they all, again, like the end result being that you expose an API that allows you to interact with your data. I chose Nest because it was what I was most comfortable with to do this, but you could do any of those. So it depends on what you need. In general, there's no silver bullet. There's always trade-offs. And the trade-off for this, I probably could have used Prisma, but I don't know. I didn't. So how do you do authentication authorization? That's a great question. So if your API is configured to like to deny queries based off authorization, you do that in the resolver layer. So your resolver can get the headers out of the request and check if it has an authorization header, and if it's a valid, like if you want to use bearer tokens, check that it's a valid bearer token. You can even do things like decode that token and get the sub from it to make sure that it's like somebody, and maybe they have permissions or roles, and see if they have access to that query. You can even do that at the field level. So you can tell people, like you can make it to where only certain fields on a type are accessible to somebody who's authorized. Let me show you, I'll show you real quick an example of a schema that has that. So in here, I'm grabbing the headers from the request, checking for an authorization header, and then I'm using auth0 in the JKS library that they have to check if that token's valid and get the decoded user from it. So that's a way to handle that on the API. Then in the UI side, when you create your client for Apollo, So what we did here, nope, not here, sorry, in index.ts here. And here you can tell it how to get headers. So you can tell it like, I want an authorization header that's a bearer token and, token, right? So, and then you could use that to like read it from your local storage if you set it on your local storage, or if there's like a service that maintains it, or a context provider that you could use to query that value. And it does check that when it runs the query. So if like you load the app and you have queries that don't require authentication, it's fine. And then the next query does, it will make sure that when you run that query that it checks for that authorization header and adds it at that point. So that's how you do that. Okay, so next, I notice you're using optional chaining. I just use the create React app, and it brings it in. But yes, there is set up in your whatever you're using to transpile, where you have to turn on optional chaining. But with Create React app, it's available. And Create React app, and I'm using TypeScript React 3.8.3. I believe it was introduced in 3.7, but I could be wrong. Don't quote me on that. But yes, so I did have to, it came out of the box, but that is something you would have to potentially turn on. Cool. All right. So I'm going to go to the last slide and then we'll be done. Okay. So if you found this training helpful and would like to learn more, would like to understand how you could implement either side of this, GraphQL, the API side or the consuming side, through a variety of different means, we'd love to teach you more. We're always offering these virtual corporate trainings that are tailored to your experience. We also write custom software and consult with custom software just as we do with training. So we can build a training to match what you are looking for, what your company is looking for, and where your needs are and where your team are. And we also work to help change and understand your culture and to progress you as an engineering team and culture as well. But we also offer corporate training. Contact us today at hi@this.co, and we will discuss and we can have a call to talk about that. I really appreciate y'all. Thanks for tuning in. Stay safe. Wash your hands. There you go. All right.
A final big thank you to our main sponsor today, Syncfusion. Syncfusion provides the ready-to-use enriched UI React components like grid, chart, and schedule. They deliver high professional themes that suit your application, and you are also able to create your own theme using the Theme Studio. Based on the application suite, the Syncfusion components provide the easy way of customization and flexible options within the Syncfusion React component. They have better support with individual demos for every feature within the component, and Syncfusion React components are written in TypeScript with 0 dependencies. Syncfusion React UI components help to build a complicated front-end web or mobile app from powerful, fast rendering templates, HTTP services, dependency injection, data management, form handling, and so on. They also support all modern web browsers with mobile responsiveness and touch-friendly gestures. Go check them out today at syncfusion.com. And again, thank you all for joining us.